organ will be the small intestine. And in Chinese, we call this 小肠. Xiao means small. In fact, the small intestine is thinner than the large intestine. That's why we call that 小. 肠, this part, in fact, is this character, which means things need to go through smoothly. But it also has the same pronunciation as lung. We call that 肠 too. Well, the small intestine locations, we say it's also in the abdominal cavity. And we say in its upper part, it connects with the stomach. By means of what? The pylorus. And in its lower part, it connects with the large intestine by means of what? This. That's a Chinese medicine description. And in fact, we say the small intestine is the longest organ in the human body. Longest organ in the human body. How long the small intestine could be? It could be like 4 to 5 meters or 12 to 15 feet in length. Why? Or what's the advantage for the small intestine to be so long? If it's so long, food has to stay long time inside, right? So that's conducive to what? To the thorough fully full decomposition of the food, you see? And also what? When it's so long, it may have a large surface, and that large surface help absorb the nutrients, you see? That's why the small intestine needs to be a very long organ. And the food in the small intestine can stay long time. Some people may have constipation. They keep eating without any bowel movement for 1 month. Where is the food? They store inside, you see? Well, in functions, first of all, we also say the small intestine receive, house, and digest food. That's the same as the stomach, as the same from the stomach. But here we mean it receives the food primarily digested from stomach, or you can call that chyme. And then the food also stays a long time in the small intestine. And when we say this, we mean what? The food in the small intestine. Small intestine is the main organ for the food to be fully, digested. To be fully digested, you see. And if we think more, what should be the motive force and what's the relationship between this function of the small intestine and the spleen? We should say, the motive force. How can the small intestine do this? It's still not the qi or yang qi, but the yang qi should be what? In Chinese method, you can think some parts of this are from the relationship between the heart and the small intestine. You can think of the heart yang could be one of them. But this function cannot be totally separated from the function of the spleen. In transformation and transportation, it's a part of that, right? So here, pretty much, it could be more the qi or yang qi of the spleen, because this function could be a part of the function of the spleen, you see? So in what case we say it's more trouble in the small intestine? In what case we say it's just from the spleen deficiency in the clinic? The small intestine, compared to the spleen may control the whole abdomen apart from the stomach area, you see? So when we mention the spleen pretty much, it should happen to the whole abdomen, and also it influences the function of the stomach. But when it's pretty localized in the low, relatively low part of the abdomen, it's not it's not in all the abdomen. Sometimes we mention like for example, deficiency cold in small intestine. Sometimes we mention that. And deficiency cold in the small intestine means what? In fact, it still means young deficiency in the small intestine. Which young? It could be part of the spleen young, it could be the yang qi from the heart. But we just say deficiency cold in the small intestine. The manifestation of that, when there is cold stagnates, cold contracts, it may cause abdominal pain, which can be relieved by warmth, by pressure. But there is also like diarrhea or loose stool and so on. We don't mention the symptoms in the stomach, and the pain is a little lower in position. So that's called deficiency cold in the small intestine. In Chinese medicine, we look at the body from many different angles. Then some parts can be overlapped, you see. But we still say the small intestine is the organ that in which the food stays the longest time to be fully digested. And apart from this, we have another term, or we have another function, which is also about this, but we specify the result of that. We say small intestine function to separate the clear from the turbid. So small intestine function to separate the clear from the turbid. And what does this mean? This basically means in the small intestine, the food of time in the small intestine will be fully decomposed. And then what will be left? The useful part, or we can call it refined food or food assets, many different translations. But we also call this the clear, the useful part. The clear, the useful part. And also we have some waste. For example, like the residue of food, and also surplus water. This will be the turbid part because human body doesn't want to use this. They need to go out, right? So when we say the small intestine function to separate the clear or turbid, in fact, we want to address the final result of this process is the separation of the clear part from the turbid part, or the food is fully decomposed in the small intestine. That's it. And then what will happen? The clear part will be absorbed. By what? By the spleen. And then it will be sent out by the spleen qi to the lung to combine with the fresh air to generate other substances. Well, the turbid will go where? in yellow emperor's internal classic, he said that the surplus water will go anteriorly to seep into bladder. And finally, it will become urine. See? Whereas the residue of food will go posterior. To the large intestine, and finally becomes stool. Finally becomes stool. That's idea. That's idea. You see? Well, because this function is mentioned in yellow emperor's internal classic, it's listed separately here. But in fact, that should be a result of this. It's just not that. Well, the third is that we also say the small intestine dominates fluid. This is a very special thing. Based on what? Based on what? You know, if this is small intestine, and we mentioned that we could have food residue here, it needs to go to the large intestine. And the surplus water here needs to go to bladder. So in fact, the small intestine also involves in what? Water metabolism. Small intestine also involves in distribution and discharge of water metabolism. That's the explanation for this. But what's the significance for Chinese medicine to address this point? In the clinic, the real reason to have this saying is what? You know, if the small intestine cannot distribute the surplus water into the bladder, the water may go this way, into the large intestine. You see? The water may go this way. And then there will be too much fluid here. Then it's called diarrhea. So in Chinese medicine, in treatment of diarrhea, we have a very important principle. We say you got to induce diuresis. If you don't do this, that's not a correct treatment. Why you got to induce diuresis? The idea is that by inducing diuresis, we'll reduce the fluid that goes to the large intestine. Then there will be less fluid in the large intestine. Then the stool can be more firm. You see? So in treatment of diarrhea, we always got to induce diuresis. And the theoretical basis of that is this. And so we say small intestine fat also involved in water metabolism. That's why we also have the function of that the small intestine dominates fluid. We have this saying. That's pretty much the information about the small intestine. And from this, you can see when we talk about the 6 organs, the information is much less than the 4 organs. Well, another organ should be the large intestine. In Chinese, large means we use 大. 大 means big and so on. Large intestine is the last part in the digestive tract in Chinese medicine. We say in location it should be in the long jaw, in the low part of the abdominal cavity. And again, in its upper part, it connects with the small intestine. That means what? That means the appendix. And in its low part, it doesn't connect with anything. It's an opening. Anus. about the location and so on. And the function of the large intestine is also very simple. In Chan medicine, we just say it functions, it functions to form and discharge what? Stool. It functions to form and discharge stool. How can the large intestine help to form stool? In Chan medicine, we also say it may help to absorb the fluid or surplus fluid in the food residue. In the food residue, it absorbs the fluid, then it will turn into stool. That's the idea. And then the stool will be discharged. That's what's happening in the large intestine. It seems to be just too simple. The question is, in Chan medicine we say also, the bowel movement itself is from the large intestine, is a function related to all the organs. That's why in yellow emperor syndrome classic, we have the saying that the anus, the long opening, is a commissioner of all the 5 thumb and 6 organs. We have this saying. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about this, of which organ and how these different organs contribute to the bowel movement. Well, if we think about that, bowel movement is also a downward movement. Discharge of stool depends on downward movement of qi, right? So we should have the multi-force for the bowel movement. But if we analyze the different organs, we may think one by one like this. For example, first of all, bowel movement is a manifestation of the digestion or transformation, transportation, right? And the spleen is the organ responsible for transformation and transportation. So if the spleen doesn't work well, definitely it will influence the bowel movement. That's why when we were talking about the function of the spleen, for example, when we say there is spleen qi deficiency, it tends to produce more diaphysics. And then there will be too much fluid in the stool. And together with poor transformation and transportation, we could have diarrhea. But if spleen qi or spleen yang is deficient, it doesn't carry this function, things just become sluggish inside. No strength to transform and transport. There could be constipation also. Right? And there could be a lot of different manifestations. But first of all, the spleen transforms and transports for stuff, and the bowel movement is one of the manifestations of that. Well, if you think about the lung, for example, we call these many organs. In Chan medicine, we say the lung and the large intestine, in fact, are interiorly related to each other. Remember this? We mean one thumb organ and one foreorgan match or pair with each other. Well, the lung can influence the large intestine by doing what? The lung qi, the main movement of lung qi is to descend. Right? Lung qi takes descending movement as the main movement in the movement of qi of the whole body. So the lung qi here should be one of the motive force to help the stool to go out. But together with the lung qi's descending movement, the lung can also distribute fluid into the large intestine to make sure it's not so dry in that place. That's the two major aspects the lung affect the large intestine. So when, for example, here, when there is lung qi deficiency, it's not strong enough to help things go out. There is constipation too. And this constipation may not be marked by very dry stool. The stool may not be dry. Patient just feels so difficult to discharge the stool, no energy. Patient may work very hard, but the stool still couldn't be discharged. Like in very old people, in people after labor, in people with very severe deficiency conditions, that's more from this deficiency. But if lung fluid is damaged, like in some kind of warm disease or febrile disease, the pathogenic heat damage lung fluid, then it may cause dryness in the large intestine. Then there is constipation, but this should have dry stool, right? Because the fluid is not enough. So the lung also influence that. And the stomach, for example. Stomach qi also tend to go downwards, right? And we mentioned that it does not only help the chyme enter the small intestine, it also helps the turbid enter the large intestine and also help to discharge the stool. So this is another possible motive force for the bowel movement. And also, stomach and large intestine are communicating directly. Both of them are a part of the digestive tract. See that? So, in fact, the stomach fluid also follows stomach qi to go down to moisten large intestine. So from these two things, we can say, for example, if stomach qi is deficient or stomach qi is stagnant, we could have constipation, and when stomach is too hot, this damage body fluid. For example, if you eat a lot of red pepper every day, you could have constipation. Why? Too much heat in the stomach, that will burn the fluid. And then there is dryness in the large intestine. Then there is constipation. And if we think about like the liver, for example, the liver qi can drag, right? And the liver belongs to wood, and we say wood restricts earth or the spleen. But if you just see the relationship between the liver and the large intestine, you can say what? The draining effect of the liver qi, in fact, is also a motive force to help the qi in the large intestine to go off, right? So that's why when liver qi is too strong in movement, this may cause what? excessive outward movement because it's moving out too much, then there could be diarrhea. Like in patients with IBS, for example, sometimes they have abdominal pain and then they want to go to the bathroom. That's more from hyperactive liver T. You can call that hyperactive liver T what? Attacking the spleen, that's also fine. But why there is diarrhea, in fact, it causes Qi to move out too much. But if there is stagnation of liver Qi, we could have what? Constipation too, because the Qi doesn't move. And the bowel movement depends on downward movement of Qi to go out. And also in Chinese, we say when there is failure of the liver Qi to regulate, there could be alternate constipation diarrhea, because the liver Qi may go too fast at this time, and then it goes too slow. Then there could be alternate constipation and diarrhea. You see, and of course, lipocating. The kidney, we just mentioned that the kidney also opens into the two yin orifices. You see? So the function of the large intestine in forming and discharging stool is determined by a lot of organs. That's why we have the saying that anus could be the commissioner for all the organs. And also, that's the reason we always ask how is the bowel movement in the clinic, because it can tell us so much, or so many organs may have the manifestation in that. So it's very important to check that, to see which organ has possible problem. A lot. So we here just give you some example. You see? Well, another organ here is the bladder. Bladder in Chinese medicine, we say it's located in the lower jaw. It's in the lower part, first of all, we address that. The second is what? Is the anterior part or is the front compared to the rectum, the large intestine, and so on. And it should be very simple about this part. But it's very interesting that we have an argument about if the bladder should have the opening in the upper part or in the lower part. So we can, if this is bladder, for example, some people believe that we should have an opening in the upper part so that the water can enter the bladder to become urine. And some people believe that bladder should only have one opening in the lower part, no opening in the upper part. Well, the people who believe that the opening should be in the upper part also believe that no opening in the lower part. It sounds very interesting, and why people argue about that? Because in Chinese medicine, both of them have clinical evidence. For example, people believing that there is only one opening in the lower part takes what as evidence? First, when we were talking about the small intestine just now, we see the small intestine as the surplus water as a part of the turbid will go anteriorly and seep into bladder. Remember that? seep into bladder. That's a saying from the original book. When you say seep, that shouldn't be big tube, right? It should be more like just very, a lot of very small holes, more like that. That's one evidence. Another evidence is what? Is a disease from treatise on febrile disease. It's a condition called disordered bladder collector. It's called disordered bladder collector. What does this mean? What does this mean? You know, that's evidence. This is evidence for the group who believes that there is only one hole in the lower part. This is evidence for the group who believes that only one hole in the upper part. And this group of people believes that there is only one hole in the upper part, no hole here. And in a normal condition, we have lots of collectors or ligament, hold the bladder. That's why the urine doesn't come out. But when the urine is full, these collectors, ligament, and so on will move, will contract. And then this bladder will be turned down. It's more like that kind of truck. They get something and say the bladder will go like this to pour out the urine, or like that. So if this depends on the kidney yang or yang qi of the kidney to keep the collectors or ligament working. But when there is deficiency of this, there will be deficiency in cold. And the cold causes what? Contraction. Cold causes contraction of the collector or ligaments. Then what will happen? The ligament of the collector will entangle here. See? Then they could work together to turn down the bladder. Then the urine cannot come out. And in the clinic, the main manifestation of this is the abdominal pain. It's a kind of colic pain with what? Dysuria. The pain is from what? From contraction of the ligaments of collectors. And difficult urination comes from failure of the bladder to be turned down. So they take this as evidence to say the bladder should have an opening in the upper part and shouldn't have opening in the lower part. In fact, both of these, Ishamason maybe have the argument about the structure of the anatomy part of the bladder. We are in fact not really argue about that. We are in fact just try to find a more reasonable explanation. When like this, both of them still exist in Chinese medicine because everyone has a group of things to support that. See? For example, like the Chinese herbs. Many herbs, like porree, like alismatis, like the xie, and so on. These herbs, when you look at the herbs, they are all polyporous. Lots of small holes. That's why they can induce diuresis. And also, some herbs are made into tube, or they take the shape of the tube. For example, like reed root. Reed root. That's like a tube. Each medicine we say it can induce diuresis too. So there is an argument about this, but we just introduce a little bit so that you have some knowledge. And you couldn't say which one is wrong. That's a problem. Both of them could be correct. You see? Well, in functions, in yellow apples in Tao Classic, the bladder is described as a place water gathers. So today we just say bladder function to store and discharge urine. Store and discharge urine. And these two, in fact, depends on what? Depends on the opening and closing movement of the bladder. And sometimes, we just call this the movement of opening and closing of the bladder. We just call this what? The steaming effect of the bladder. Pay attention to this thing. The effect of the bladder in opening and closing affects the storage or discharge of the urine, right? And we just call this the 气化 or steaming effect of the bladder. That's just the real meaning of this saying. But in Chinese medicine, this function of the bladder, in fact, is pretty much controlled by the kidney. Because the kidney, say, and the bladder are arterial internally related to each other, and the kidney is one of the 5 lung organs. So the bladder should be just affiliated organ to the kidney some parts, to some points. And how the bladder is affected at the kidney, we in fact just discussed that. We will say the kidney opens into the arterial in orifice. We say the kidney controls both formation and discharge of urine. The kidney controls this. You see? And the kidney works on that by 2 different functions. One is the steaming function, another one is controlling function. The steaming function helps the fluid turn into urine, and also it helps the bladder to what? Open. While the consolidating or controlling effect of the kidney help to hold the urine or help to keep the bladder closed. You see? So pretty much the function of the bladder in doing this is controlled by the kidney. We just mentioned that. But in the clinic, what are the relatively independent cases? We do have independent pattern for the bladder. For example, when we have bladder infection, in Chinese medicine we call that deficit in bladder. And this takes what as the main manifestation? Like frequent, urgent, painful urination. This is the main manifestation. And why it could be urgent and frequent if this is bladder? Originally, the capacity is so big. Now we have that height. They occupy this part. So when even just a little amount of urine is formed, it feels full. And also the heat inside will force qi to move fast, right? When there is heat, the heat forces qi to move fast. And the fluid will go out together with the movement of qi. That causes what? Frequent and urgent urination. Why is painful? Because of the blockage. You see? There is that heat here, say there is some urine, more blockage. That's why it's painful. That's why it's painful. For this, we just call that damp heat in the bladder. And we have a very useful formula for that. And most of the herbs are diuretic herbs. They induce diuretics because they reductase. And together with the urination, the heat can go out when you induce diuretics. You see? That's a relatively independent pattern. But sometimes we do say there is deficiency cold in bladder. But this should be a part of the manifestation of kidney yang deficiency, which causes deficiency cold. But why we address in bladder? The reason is that patient takes chain of the urination as the main manifestation. You know, kidney yang deficiency can cause so many different patterns. Some people just have cold lips. Some people may have infertility. But how can you address? It's more in the urination. Trouble with bladder. We sometimes say is deficiency cold in the bladder, but that's still a part of the kidney yang deficiency. You see? So that's some basic information about the bladder. But in fact, in the clinic, we could have lots of different conditions. But in our clinic here, sometimes you can see the infection. Sometimes you can see the stone. In Chinese medicine, you know, for the urinary stone, no matter if it's a stone in the bladder or stone in the kidney, it's more like a case of this. More like a case of this. And some people with, like, it's called interstitial cystitis. Have you ever heard of that? It's a very tough condition in Western medicine. It could be very chronic. That can be a case of kidney yang deficiency also. We used to have a patient and we give the herb for kidney yang deficiency because her manifestation are totally identical with what we mentioned when we say the bladder cannot turn over from the entangled, from the disorder, you know, ligaments and so on. And that formula is originally for that. And she has a typical manifestation. We use a typical formula, and she typically felt better afterwards. So it's very interesting. That's why we got to look through the description in Chinese medicine. Lots of things, not so simple. That's what we have, mentioned here. That is bladder. And apart from the bladder, the last one is triple-gel. It's a very special organ, right? We mentioned that triple-gel may not be really from observation of the human body. It could be a concept put forward based on the based on yang theory. We have heaven, man, and the earth. That's a basic structure in this world. Well, triple-gel is also translated as san-gel. It's also translated as energizer or triple burner. Right? Many different translations. But I think triple-gel is the most commonly used translation. About triple-gel in Chinese medicine, at least, we should have three different concepts. We are going to talk about the location of shape. In yellow emperor's eternal classic, you mentioned that triple-gel has a name, but it doesn't have shape. That's the same originally. Then how can we talk about the location of the shape? In Chinese medicine, three different kinds of knowledge. First, triple gel could be a big space. This space is located where? Is that is the space between the wall of the trunk and the internal organs. If this is the human body, we have different organs here. The space here, you see, all of them are called triple gel. So it should be the space between internal organs and the wall of the trunk. Because if it's such a big space, it's bigger than any organ there. So each method is also called solitary organ. Why is it called in this way? Because one thumb organ marries one full organ, right? But we have 5,000 organs and we have 6 full organs, so we got to leave one full organ to be single. That's the triple gel. So a doctor in the main diagnostic discovered that, of all the 6 organs or some organs, the triple gel is the biggest one. That's why we should call that solitary organ, because no other organ can match with it or marry.
Do you mean solitary?
Solitary, single, solitary, right? Solitary organ. And so, in fact, we don't have the anterior-interior relationship for triple gel. In meridian theory, we have the pericardial meridian match with triple gel meridian. But in some full theory, triple gel is single. We have 5,006 organs. Triple gel is the only single one. See? And we'll explain why this is one of the understanding about the locations. There is first strong support. The second is that triple gel is in fact a collective term for the upper, middle, and the lower part of the body of trunk. That means what? If this is the trunk, this is the neck, this is the inguinal groove. We call this part upper gel. We call this part middle gel. We call this part lower gel. And this upper gel should include the organs in the upper part, like the heart and the lung. This include liver, gallbladder, spleen, stomach, and so on. This includes the bladder, uterus, large intestine, and so on. It's just a collective term for these 3 different parts. That's the second meaning of that. The third meaning is that triple gel is also a diagnostic method. We use triple gel as the 3 stages in analyzing febrile disease or infectious disease. But that's related to this. But we treat that as a diagnostic method, or it stands for more than 3 major stages. Involve disease. You see? Have all these 3 in your mind first. Then we'll discuss this one by one. So why people could believe that the triple gel can be just a big space between the organs and the wall of the trunk. Intromission, we should say, is a functions we mentioned that determines where or what it could be. Because in yellow apples internal classic, it mentioned two functions for triple gel. We mentioned the big space first. In that book, first, it mentions that triple gel should be the place for the primordial qi to distribute, or it functions to distribute primordial qi. What does this mean? This is the whole trunk. We have kidney here. Primordial qi, you can also just call that kidney qi, is generated in the kidney. And then primordial qi need to go to every part of the body. And then people have to think, how can the primordial qi go through or go from the kidney to every part of the body? There must be space for the qi to go through. You see? That's why in yellow apples internal classic is that the triple gel function to distribute primordial qi. Because primordial qi takes triple gel as a space to go to every part of the body. That's one function. Another function mentioned in yellow apples internal classic is that we say triple gel is also the pathway for water, or it functions to distribute water. The body fluid or water also need to go to every part of the body. And how can they go? They need space to go through. You see? So we say triple gel could be a big space between the organs and the wall of the body. We mean, the primordial qi and the body fluid need this space to be distributed. Need to be distributed by means of the space. That's why even today we still say triple gel could be the space based on these two functions. And because the triple gel also involves water metabolism and is a place for primordial qi to distribute, in Chinese medicine, we also call this the steaming function of triple gel. You just know these terms. That's a term just telling you that triple gel involves in the water distribution and the distribution of the primordial qi. Well, the second is the triple gel as a collective term for all the three parts. And the upper gel in location should be the part above diaphragm. Should be the part above the diaphragm. Mean, the part above the diaphragm, the trunk of the body. And what are the organs here? Mostly the lung and the heart, right? We have lung and heart in this place. And what is the function of the upper gel? It said that the upper gel function as do or fuck. What does this mean? They function to distribute nutrients. in Chinese, we say this is in the upper part, more like the heaven. And from the heaven, let the spark of dew can come down and moisten or nourish the lawn, the grass, to help them grow, right? And in Chinese medicine, we say the refined food need to go up to the chest to combine with the fresh air inhaled by the lungs, right? Then, most of the nutrients will be finally formed in the chest. And then they need to go to other parts of the body. By what? By the functions of the lung and the heart, right? So generally, the upper jaw, including the lung and the heart, mainly function to distribute nutrients. So we describe that as 2 or 5. That's all from yellow apples in internal cluster. It's not from modern type. And we also have the saying in treatment. We say the conditions in the upper jaw need to be treated with very light herbs. Herbs with a light weight. And it says that herbs for upper jaw condition should be as light as what? As feather. Should be very light. Only this way they can float up to the upper jaw and work on that. It said that if it's not light enough, it may not go to the upper part. Because they say. So for a lot of conditions, for cold and flu, for example, that's more the trouble is the lung. In Chinese, mostly we use the leaves, the flowers, like the upper part of the trees. Plants also, they are lighter. They are lighter. And that's the upper jaw. The middle jaw. The location should be the part between or below what? Diaphragm and above the navel. And in this part, what organs appear? We say there is spleen, stomach, and sometimes we put liver here, gallbladder, and so on. We have these organs. And these organs, especially the spleen and stomach, are the major organs for what? For digestion. For digestion. So, in functions, it's said that the function of the middle jaw is more like TUA or TAA, I forgot. That's a big barrel. For example, in France, people
Tub.
TUA, it should be this, right? Big barrel to make wine, to ferment something, right? It's said that it's more like this. Why? Because the food will be mainly digested in this part, right? And the process of digesting is more like, preparing wine. You got to make the food into paste or something like that, right? So this thing about the middle jaw, in fact, is a summary of the digesting function, which is carried out by these organs mainly. See? But it's in the middle part of the body. So in treatment, there is also a saying that the weight of the herbs you use for conditions here should be moderate. And it said that only in this way it can be balanced. And we also describe this like what? It's more like, it's called scale or weight here. That's something we use to weigh the weight. And we say it's more like the rod here. it needs to be balanced in order to be able to weigh something, right? And the earth used for the middle jaw condition shouldn't be too light or too heavy. It should be moderate because it's in the middle part. It's a very important idea. And the low jaw, should be the part below what? The navel, and above pubic symphysis. Say how to say that? Pubic something like this. One here, like this. And in this part, there's a low part. And in this part, what happens? We have the uterus, the bladder, the large intestine. We have this kind of organs. And if you look at the common functions of this, the low jaw malfunction to discharge the waste, right? So it's described in function as a what? The pipeline for the sewage or the waste water. And why we summarize the common function of this organ as this? Because the waste goes there and go out. But when we treat the conditions in the low part, we need heavy herbs. Heavy herbs, more like from the root and some of the trees. The heavy, they go to the low part, And it said that the herb you use for the low jaw condition should be as heavy as this. This is called what? This is called weight, right? Weight. How do you call this part? A very heavy part. You put the things here. The heavy thing here. It's called weight, the thing. Weight. I don't know. But that's the earth we use for that should be, it's made from metal, it's fixed. When we have something like that, it's called weight, I think. And we need to use heavy earth only in this way they can go down. That's a description about the triple jaw. That's also from Chapel Pepper in our passing. But when we analyze this, we can easily tell, they're not the same as the triple jaw as a big space because we have all the organs here. And also, triple jaw, the character is what? There is a bird in the upper part. There is fire in the lower part. So you are burning a bird with fire. So triple jaw, in fact, means what? It in fact is it could be a summary for the whole metabolism from how the food being digested, how the nutrients being formed and distributed, and how the metabolic waste be discharged. You see? So the middle jaw is more like the place for the digestion, for food to be processed. The upper jaw is a place more for the useful substances to be formed and distributed. And the lower jaw is more the place for the waste to go out. So the triple jaw as three locations is a summary of these three major processes. So there are two very different concepts. See that? And triple jaw as a diagnostic method is similar to the second one, only that two things. One is that it's believed that the condition starts in the upper part, upper jaw, and then the condition go further into the middle jaw. And then at the later stage, it's a condition in the lower jaw. So the upper jaw conditions or patterns are more at the early stage or the early part of the middle stage. And this is more the advanced stage. stage. And this is more like a later stage of the restoration stage. You see? And also, when the condition moves like this, in the later part, we have liver and kidney gene deficiency because it's for warm disease, for infectious disease, pathogenic heat, damage in fluid, and finally, they will damage the gene or in essence in the liver as a kidney. In triple gel diagnostic method, liver is here together with kidney. It's in the low gel, not in the middle gel. Not in the middle gel. But in the triple gel method, just now we mentioned liver is still in the middle gel, you see? And this is used more as a method to analyze the different stages. But it takes the three locations as a basis to mark the different stages. So it has some connections with the second meaning. But basically, that's the information about triple gel, Don't feel confused. You can feel confused, but don't feel so frustrated. In the future, with more and more information coming to the mind, you will feel more interesting, and it's more thoughtful, I think. It's very interesting. And it's not that they look unreasonable according to our modern standard thing. It's not. It could be more, reasonable sometimes. So that's all the triple gel. All right. Okay. Me. The part about the diaphragm, the trunk of the body. And what are the organs here? Mostly the lung and the heart, right? We have lung and heart in this place. And what is the function of the apical? It says that the apical function as do or fuck. What does this mean? They function to distribute nutrients. In Chinese, we say this is in the upper part, more like the heaven. And from the heaven, let the spark of dew can come down and moisten or nourish the lung, the grass, to help them grow, right? And in Chinese medicine, we say the refined food need to go up to the chest to combine with the fresh air inhaled by the lungs, right? Then, most of the nutrients will be finally formed in the chest. And then they need to go to other parts of the body. By what? By the functions of the lung and the heart, right? So generally, the apical, including the lung and the heart, mainly function to distribute nutrients. So we describe that as do or fuck. That's all from yellow apples and classic. It's not from modern type. And we also have the same in treatment. We say the conditions in the apical need to be treated with very light herbs. Herbs with a light weight. And it says that herbs for apical condition should be as light as what? As feather. Should be very light. Only this way they can float up to the apical and work on that. It said that if it's not light enough, it may not go to the upper part because they say. So for a lot of conditions, for cold and flu, for example, that's more the trouble is the lung. In Chinese medicine, mostly we use the leaves, the flowers, like the upper part of the trees, plants also, they are lighter. And that's the opposite. The middle gel, in location should be the part between or below what? Diaphragm and above the navel. And in this part, what organs are here? We say there is spleen, stomach, and sometimes we put liver here, gallbladder, and so on. We have these organs. And these organs, especially the spleen and stomach, are the major organs for what? For digestion. So in functions, it's said that the function of the middle jaw is more like a TUA or TAA, I forgot. That's a big barrel. For example, in France, people
Tub.
TUA, it should be this, right? Big barrel to make wine, to ferment something, right? It's said that it's more like this. Why? Because the food will be mainly digested in this part, right? And the process of digesting is more like, preparing wine. You got to make the food into paste or something like that, right? So this thing about the middle jaw, in fact, is a summary of the digesting function, which is carried out by these organs mainly, see? But it's in the middle part of the body. So in treatment, there is also a saying that the weight of the herbs you use for conditions here should be moderate. And it said that only in this way it can be balanced. And we also describe this like what? It's more like, it's called scale or weight here. That's something we use to weigh the weight. And we say it's more like the rod here. It needs to be balanced in order to be able to weigh something, right? And the herbs used for the middle jaw condition shouldn't be too light or too heavy. It should be moderate because it's in the middle part. It's a very important idea. And the low jaw, should be the part below what? The navel, and above pubic symphysis. Say, how to say that? Pubic say something like this. One here, like this. And in this part, there's a low part. And in this part, what organs we have? Like uterus, like bladder, like large intestine, this kind of organs. And if you look at the common functions of this, the low jaw malfunction to discharge the waste, right? So it's described in function as a what? The pipeline for the sewage or the waste water. And why we summarize the common function of this organs as this? Because the waste go there and go out. But when we treat the conditions in the low part, we need heavy herbs, more like from the root and so on of the trees. They're heavy, they go to the low part, And is that the Earth you use for the low-Gauss condition should be as heavy as this. This is called what? This is called weight, right? Weight. How do you call this part? A very heavy part. You put the things here. The heavy thing here. It's called weight, I think. Weight.
Counterweight?
I don't know. That's the Earth we use for that should be, it's made from metal, it's fixed. When we have something like that, it's called weight, I think. And we need to use heavy earth only in this way they can go down. That's a description about the triple gel. That's also from thermodynamics in passing. But when we analyze this, we can easily tell they're not the same as the triple gel as a big space because we have all the orbits here. And also, triple gel, the character is what? There is a bird in the upper part. There is fire in the lower part. So you are burning a bird with fire. So triple gel, in fact, means what? It in fact is it could be a summary for the whole metabolism from how the food being digested, how the nutrients being formed and distributed, and how the metabolic waste be discharged. You see? So the middle gel is more like the place for the digestion, for food to be processed. The upper gel is a place more for the useful substances to be formed and distributed. And the lower gel is more the place for the waste to go out. So the triple gel at 3 locations is a summary of these 3 major processes. So there are 2 very different concepts. See that? And triple gel as a diagnostic method is similar to the second one, only that 2 things. One is that it's believed that the condition starts in the upper part, upper gel, and then the condition go further into the middle gel. And then at the later stage is a condition in the lower gel. So the upper gel conditions or patterns are more at the early stage or the early part of the middle stage. And this is more the advanced stage. And this is more like the later stage of the restoration stage. You see? And also, when the condition moves like this, in the later part, we have liver and kidney gene deficiency because it's for warm disease, for infectious disease, pathogenic heat, damage in fluid, and finally, they will damage the gene or gene essence in the liver and the kidney. In triple gel diagnostic method, liver is here together with kidney. It's in the low gel, not in the middle gel. Not in the middle gel. But in the triple gel method, just now we mentioned liver is still in the middle gel, you see? And this is used more as a method to analyze the different stages. But it takes the 3 locations as the basis to mark the different stages. So it has some connections with the second meaning. But basically, that's the information about triple gel. Don't feel confused. You can feel confused, but don't feel so frustrated. In the future, with more and more information coming to the mind, you will feel more interested, and it's more thoughtful, I think. It's very interesting. And it's not that they look unreasonable according to our modern standard. Thing is not. It could be more, reasonable sometimes. So that's all the triple gel. All right. Okay.